So, good afternoon. Welcome to a trader support service operational update. My name is Kevin Shakespeare from the Institute of Export and International Trade. I would also like to introduce my colleagues Shankar Singham and Frank Dunsmuir as well from Fujitsu. Shankar and Frank, could I ask you to introduce yourselves, please? Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Kevin. I'm Shankar Singham. I'm an advisor with the Trader Support Service. My specific areas and work with the Trader Support Service are in the areas of international trade, customs, and regulatory issues. And I've been practicing in this area, including with as the head of trade at two large global law firms for almost 3 decades now, and work with the TSS on stakeholder engagement and on the legal and trade sides of the house.
And good morning, I'm Frank Dunsmuir. I'm from Fujitsu, where I look after our Customs and International Trade Department. And I was one of the founding members of the TSS program.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everyone for attending. Apologies for the last minute change of webinar link. We had a high number of potential attendees, so we've actually changed the site to make sure we can accommodate the additional numbers if required. So I'm going to run through some slides, but first of all, can I pass to my colleague William Barnes-Graham, who will just run a polls, just so we can get some idea of, if you like, the focus of the attendees today. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Kevin. So for the first poll, we're just going to ask everyone, just want to find out a little bit more about you. So the question is, could you tell us which of these best describes your business? The options there are a haulier, a trader based in Wales selling goods to NI, trader in Wales selling products of animal origin to NI, or other. And I'll just give everyone a few seconds to answer that question. And just a quick housekeeping note, because we're using a webinar platform, if you do have any questions you want to verbalize, there's a question panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and I can unmute attendees on request as well. So yeah, please do contact us through there. Okay, so I'll close that poll in 5 seconds. Okay, and just to share the results. So 25% traders in Wales selling goods to NI, a fair few in the other category there, but also some traders selling products of animal origin. Okay, Kevin, any thoughts on that? Should I hand back to you now?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Sorry, could you just go through these specific percentages again? Sorry.
So it's 25% saying they are trader based in Wales selling goods to NI, 6% trader in Wales selling products of animal origin, 69% in the other category, and 0% who are hauliers.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful. So yeah, it's interesting there that there is a percentage of traders in Wales. So we have a couple of other polls which we'd like to ask as well. So again, Will, sorry to ask another poll at this stage. Would you mind running the one in terms of the freight routes for moving goods from GB to NI as well, please? Thank you.
Of course, just launch that one now. So the question here is, which transport route do you use for moving goods to NI? The options here are Holyhead to Dublin and onto the Northern Ireland, Fishguard to Sylwer, air freight from Cardiff or another airport in Wales, and other as well. And again, I'll just give everyone a few seconds to answer that poll. Okay, if I could just give people 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so 70% go from Holyhead to Dublin, 10% Fishguard to Osler, 0% on the call today using air freight, and then 20% other. Is that about as expected, Kevin?
Yeah, that's probably about broadly what expected. And again, thank you very much for everyone for actually detailing. That's really helpful. So what we're going to do now is run through some slides. We'll cover some key principles, and please feel free to raise questions using the chat facility as indicated. So I'm going to pass first of all to my colleague Shankar Singham to run through some slides. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Kevin, and thank you to everyone who answered the poll questions. That's going to be very helpful, and that'll guide the presentation. So, Kevin, if you can go to the next slide and the next one. So the important thing here is obviously we're in a very heated end stage of the EU-UK negotiation with regard to the free trade agreement, but I think it's very important for people to recognise that regardless of whether there is a deal or no deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol must still be implemented on January 1 of 2021. So in a few short days. And therefore, because the Northern Ireland Protocol does change the way trade across the GB to NI boundary works, the government has set up this free-to-use trader support service. So the first points about this are, number one, it's free to use. Kevin, if we can go back, thanks. It's free to use in all of its dimensions. So not only does it provide a digital first customs declaration service, so TSS will do the customs declarations that the traders need to be done, and it will do those for free. It will also offer education and advice, which is done through the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, which Kevin is the dean of. And all of that is free as well. So it's important to remember that. TSS also has a contact center that will be up to 700 people. And it's important to understand how to use the contact center. This is a digital first service, which means that we're a basic service. We have a system that you can take advantage of, but it is more like a sort of Amazon-like service as opposed to a value-added customs intermediary service where you call up a customs intermediary and you say, I'm about to move goods from GB to NI, can you raise a declaration for me? The contact center should not be used in that way. The way to use the contact center is to say, if you have a question on your registration, for example, or you have a question on precisely what information you need to submit into the various portals that we will go over as we go through the presentation. So that's a little bit of what the TSS will do. What the TSS will not do is, again, it's not a personalized service. It won't offer to individual traders the kind of service that a typical customs broker or intermediary offers, and it won't replace the existing services of the existing intermediary market in Northern Ireland. TSS is supposed to be around for a couple of years. It will exit the market, and at that point it's very important that the Northern Ireland intermediary market is functioning. And the other point, although we didn't have too many traders who trade in goods of animal origin, TSS will only do the customs declarations. It won't do the raising of other certifications, like in the case of goods of animal origin, health certificates, export health certificates, some of the SPS related certifications. Those you need to talk to your contacts in DEFRA and DERA if you are trading in goods of animal origin, or goods that are subject to sanitary or phytosanitary requirements. The government is standing up, as was referred to in the command paper which came out last week, a movement advisory scheme, which is the MAS, which is being set up by DEFRA, and it is designed, like TSS, to help traders with the customs piece of this. It's designed to help traders with the certification side of this. we will in TSS offer educational advice on these issues, and there's already training available on the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, but we won't be doing the documentation. So if we go to the next slide. So the question that's been raised frequently is who actually has to engage in these new processes. And it's really important to understand that any time goods are moving across the GB-NI boundary, particularly from GB to NI, and I'm going to go over in a second the different routes possible, GB to NI, if a good is moving across that boundary, then a customs declaration will be required. So we got three examples there of a construction company in Northern Ireland buying tools from a supplier based in Cardiff. That will require, in the ordinary case, a declaration. A brewery in let's say Wales, since we're talking about Wales to NI trade, where you've got product going to bars and restaurants in Northern Ireland, that will require customs declarations. Computer chain, where you're moving product between stores, an intra-store movement will require a customs declaration, although you can use the stock transfer form instead of a commercial invoice, because obviously there won't be a commercial invoice. And then, although we don't have hauliers on the call, hauliers and freight forwarders absolutely critical to our process, because it is the hauliers and the forwarders and the carriers who are supposed to be raising. We will be raising the entry summary declaration, the safety and security declaration, which is the first part of the process, and that is the process where the haulier and the freight forwarder links to the government's GVMS system, which is the goods movement reference, the goods vehicle movement service. Sorry, there's unfortunately going to be a lot of acronyms today, but we will do our best to explain them all. The GVMS system is the system which will enable the trucks and the hauliers to go through those ferry terminals, especially the Holyhead terminal in this case. And our system is reliant on the ENS declaration as the trigger for the import declarations, the simplified frontier declaration, and the supplementary declaration that follows it, which the TSS will raise on behalf of the trader. One quick point on all of this is it's really, really important. If you haven't already done so, it's really critical to register on TSS at tradersupportservice.co.uk. You can still do that now. Today is a very big day because those who are registered now, as of December the 14th, two things are relevant here. One is that you will be auto-enrolled for your XI prefixed EORI number, which you need in order for us to raise customs declarations on your behalf, because we are raising them into a EU-facing system, which requires an EU EORI number. And the XI prefix number is an EU EORI number, so that is necessary. Now there is a manual process. You don't have to use TSS, but then you need to use a customs intermediary, and you need to get an XI EORI number. You can avoid all of that if you are registered, because you will be automatically enrolled for that XI EORI number. The other thing that happens today is that the government will be producing the form in which you can apply to be a not at risk trader if your goods are moving from GB to NI and are not moving, and you have good evidence of this, that they are not moving into Ireland, and therefore you would not have to worry about paying any duties, which is obviously going to be quite important. So we'll talk about that in a second. In a bit more detail, but if we can go to the next slide. So there are sort of 5 principal routes that we envisage here. The one that is most significant, and obviously is very significant to this group, is the Great Britain to Northern Ireland route, where there will be declarations, there will be import declarations, not export declarations, because it isn't technically an export from GB to NI, because Northern Ireland is part of the UK customs territory under the Northern Ireland Protocol. But these goods will be subject to duties if they're considered at risk of moving to the EU. Now, there has been clarification. There was a command paper last week and a release of the draft decision of the Joint Committee on this, and there has been some training in this area. Also, there's been some information that TSS has provided on this area. So what we can say is there is an application form that is being produced today by the UK government. You can apply to be not at risk. If you apply to be not at risk, it's based on both the trader and the goods themselves. So you have to fill in this application form. If you fill it in, you are provisionally deemed to be not at risk for a 4-month period, after which there will be a evaluation process from HMRC. Now, the evaluation is based on the evidence that you've submitted as to why you think you're not at risk. And of course, this is, I should say that this is a declaration to HMRC, to the UK government. And so you must be absolutely, obviously, factually correct and truthful in your response. You must actually have evidence that your goods are not at risk, and that will be subject in 4 months' time to a proper evaluation. Initially, it will be provisional, and it will be dated as of the date of your application. You can apply for this for a 2-month period from now. And you'll be granted that authorization. In order to take advantage of this, you must have a facility in Northern Ireland. It must be real. It can't just be a brass plate. And if you are trading goods on DDP terms, delivered duty paid, in other words, it is the GB supplier that has the obligation to do the customs declaration, and you don't have a Northern Ireland facility, then in order to take advantage of this, you must be using a customs intermediary and doing the customs process in the UK using an intermediary who is operating in what's called an indirect representative capacity, which is what TSS does. So we ought to you ought to be covered in that respect. And your goods need to be moving to consumer-facing facilities. So you can't be moving goods to sort of generalized distribution centers. They have to be going to retail or going to wholesale selling to retail. And there are a few other requirements that we detail in our communications. And if you are registered, you'll be receiving the TSS bulletin that goes into this in all the detail which you need. So that's Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland to Great Britain, no restrictions, no paperwork going from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, except in these cases of goods to which international treaties apply, like CITES and endangered species and so on. But more importantly and more significantly, goods in duty suspension. So if I'm trading, for example, from a Northern Ireland bonded warehouse to a GB bonded warehouse, or I'm using another customs facilitation that has goods moving in duty suspension, then I will have to do export declarations, but only in that case. So if your goods are in free circulation in Northern Ireland, and the test initially will be if they are in free circulation in Northern Ireland, then you should not have to do an export declaration. You will not have to do an export declaration for moving those goods from Northern Ireland to GB. Northern Ireland to and from Ireland, no change, no regulatory checks, no tariffs, no new paperwork. Northern Ireland to and from rest of the world. There are 2 tariff schedules that are applicable here. One is potentially applicable. One is the UK Global Tariff schedule. And the UK Global Tariff is different from the Common External Tariff of the EU. So if your goods are coming in from the rest of the world into Northern Ireland, you will apply the UK Global Tariff schedule for not at-risk goods. If goods are considered at risk of moving to the EU, then you'll apply the European Common External Tariff. And if you can then demonstrate evidence that your goods didn't move into the EU, then you may be subject to a rebate. And that specific information about the potential rebate and so on will be detailed in communications that TSS will be making to traders through the TSS, the various TSS bulletins. So please register so you can get them. That is our only way of communicating with the trader community. We have about 19,000 traders registered. Obviously, it's not possible to provide 19,000 personalized communications. So this is the way we communicate with you. Transit routes. Now, transit, obviously, particularly for this group, is absolutely crucial. We're going to spend some time on this, particularly with regard to the Holyhead Dublin route. I noticed that 70% of you use that route. It is a very important route, and we're very conscious of that. And we will therefore support transit between GB to NI via Ireland, that Holyhead Dublin route principally. I mean, there is another route that was mentioned, but I don't think there's a great number of you that are using that one. And we'll talk about how our transit process works. Now, the important thing I would say about transit, and I noticed there aren't any hauliers on the call, the transit process is really between the haulier and TSS and the various government systems. As a trader, you shouldn't really notice any specific issues with transit that are different from what you'd have to do anyway. So you're going to be providing TSS the information it needs in order to raise a declaration on your behalf, particularly things like commodity codes information. If you're trading goods that are not controlled, that would be at the supplementary declaration stage. If you are trading in goods that are controlled, and some SPS goods are controlled, you'd need to provide that at the simplified frontier declaration stage. But what you see in terms of when you have to provide this information as a trader, that's not going to change. You're going to call up your haulier and you're going to say, I need to move these goods from GB to Northern Ireland. The trader, the haulier may choose that transit route, and they will then have to interact with our system. And we'll show you how that works in the interest of explaining how it works. But it isn't something that the trader needs to be especially concerned about. If we go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand over to Frank now, and we'll probably go to the next slide in the interest of time, and the next one. And we'll talk about what exactly, so we're going to talk about three things. One is, what are the processes that you need to think about and you need to be able to understand in order for us to do them? We'll talk about where you fit in terms of the flow diagrams, where you fit into to how this all works. And you have to remember as a trader that we're going to give you all of this information because we think it's useful for you to know this. But at the end of the day, there's certain core things that you absolutely have to submit to TSS, and that's what you need to know. And we have detailed user guides sort of coming out that will explain to you exactly what you need to do in order to take advantage of the system. So I'm going to hand over to Frank now to cover off some of the next few slides.
Thank you, Shankar. So as Shankar mentioned, I'll go through some of the basics on customs and what's changing with the movement from Great Britain to Northern Ireland for the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So first of all, look at the new procedures that will be in place, then talk a bit more about your role, the different organisations and their roles within that process, and then we'll show you the flow charts associated with the movement of goods from start to finish. So next slide, please, Kevin. And what we've highlighted here is a summary of the type of declarations that are required to move goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So this is a direct movement. It's not the Holyhead route at the moment. I'll come back to that one in a moment. But if you're moving them direct, then we are treating, or the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland are treated much like an import. There's no equivalent export from Great Britain. It's an import process into Northern Ireland. And we've got three sets of goods there: standard SPS, which is animal product and plant product, controlled goods on the right, and excise goods. And what's in common is the blue requirements, and then you've got extra requirements depending on the nature of those goods in black text beneath. On the left-hand side, for standard goods, moving, see standard goods being goods that aren't under any special licenses or controls. You'll need an entry summary declaration into Northern Ireland, and you'll need a simplified frontier declaration. That gets the product into Northern Ireland, and once it's there, there's a supplementary declaration process. In terms of who does all of these things, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but those are the three main declarations. The first two to get in, and the third one to declare what's arrived in a bit more detail so we can close out the declaration process. For hauliers, they'll need to do a goods vehicle movement system entry as well, which is the black item down there. And then when you move to SPS goods, animal product and plant products, in addition to the ones on the left-hand side, there will be a requirement for health and certificates and or sanitary certificates for plants. There may be there'll be a requirement to enter those movements in traces as well. And on the right-hand side, for control goods, you might need some additional licenses depending on the nature of those goods, chemicals and things like that. And for excise goods, there may be an entry into the excise database to say that you're moving goods under what's called duty suspension. So it gives you a flavour of the type of declarations and what is consistent across all types of goods in blue. And on the next page, we'll share these slides with you. This is mainly for the hauliers, and there aren't any on the call, so very, very briefly, the entry summary declaration that the first declaration we mentioned on the previous page is actually raised by the haulier, and this is simply saying to Border Force, I'm coming through the following port at the following time, so Liverpool at 12:30, and I'm carrying this list of goods. Then it allows Border Force to do a check, and if they wish, they may want to have a look at those goods depending on the information that's provided. But that's a haulier requirement. And the next page. Transit. This is more important, and we'll go through this in detail on the transit flow diagram. So this is much more relevant to the audience today in terms of transit is, as Shanker mentioned, it's a procedure that allows you to move goods through a customs region. So you can move your goods from Wales on the Holyhead to Dublin route, and they can transit through the Republic of Ireland and enter Northern Ireland. It's in effect like a sealed moving warehouse, and you're guaranteeing that those goods don't come out of that vehicle during that journey. And in the interest of time, just at the bottom there, we've got the requirements to use transit would be a transit guarantee. So some sort of guarantee that says, yes, I am going to deliver those goods. It may not be the trader that provides that guarantee, by the way. It can be provided by a number of different organisations. And the goods need to leave from an authorised office of departure so that customs know where those sealed container goods are being loaded. And it will arrive at an office of destination so that we know where the goods arrive, and if customs need to, they can meet those goods and check them on arrival. We'll go through this on a flow chart in a moment to make it a little bit clearer. And on the next slide, the other thing to bear in mind is if you are moving goods into Northern Ireland and those products are then being used to be placed on the market or create a product, do be aware of changes in labelling and certification requirements for selling products either in the UK or in the EU. And we won't go through these because it's not really a customs item, but it has come up several times in seminars. So it's a reminder to just check that labelling and certification is as it's required. And the next one. Oh yes, so what we'd like to talk about now is your role within the process. So depending on what sort of organisation you are, and depending on the nature of the goods and the routes you take and the process that you use, you have a certain role within the movement of these goods. So we've listed 5 on the left-hand side there. Freight forwarders who arrange for the transport, and they sometimes do customs intermediary service and customs administration. So they'll arrange the haulier, the ferry, and various procedures like that, and making sure that you're compliant with the required procedures. There's carriers which carry the goods either on the road, sea or air, and then the customs speak for suppliers. People sending the goods are consignors, and people receiving the goods, the buyers, are consignees. And there may as well be customs intermediaries and other brokers involved in the process to help with either customs declarations or special licenses or health certificates and items like that. So let's have think about what those organisations do. And on the next slide, that's largely determined by this busy little slide. I don't want to give a talk on this slide in detail because it would take hours. The point of this slide is this determines the role and responsibility of the buyer and the supplier within the movement of those goods. And it's called Incoterms, and on the left-hand side is a set of 3-letter acronyms starting at the top with EXW, it is X works, and at the bottom it ends with DDP, which is delivered duty paid. And along the top from left to right are a set of steps that start with the goods being loaded at the supplier's offices or depot, the export declarations being created, they're carted to the port, etc. And it goes all the way across to the right-hand side when the buyer receives the goods. And in pink and green, you can see buyer and seller on that screen, and that denotes who's responsible for that particular activity according to the Incoterm. And Incoterms are international standards, so that the supply chain will be familiar with these terms, international supply chain. And if you say FOB, they'll understand free on board, and they'll understand who's responsible for what. The important thing here is please understand your terms of trade with your supplier and haulier and any other organizations that are involved. And on the next slide, we'll simplify the message here, which is if you're at the top of the slide, top of the table, then those goods are being provided X works. So X works means you as a trader, so your business in Wales is sending goods to Northern Ireland. You're just literally putting them in a package and waiting for it to be picked up. The transport is arranged by the Northern Ireland buyer. They are arranging all the customs documentation and payments, and any duty payments and any VAT they're actually looking after. So as a trader, it's very nice to do X works because you're just waiting for the buyer to look after all that. More common perhaps is DDP at the bottom, which is delivered duty paid, and that means it's actually you, the trader, who organises all of that. So you'll charge them for the goods, you'll arrange and charge them for the transport, you'll make sure the declarations are raised, and you'll also be responsible for paying duties if they're liable, any tariffs are liable on there. Of course, those things may be chargeable as part of the service provided. So anything else in between the XW at the top and DDP at the bottom is a combination of those two. But the most important thing is please find out from your supply chain what Incoterms are being used. And on the next slide, even with all of that responsibility defined, we talked earlier about the role of organisations within the supply chain, within the movement of goods, and the Incoterms. Even with those responsibilities defined according to international terms, the really important thing is to make sure that information moves from one organisation to the other one in a timely manner. And what's more critical today with this type of movement is that, in particular, the haulier gets the information they need in order to be able to fill in the declarations that they will have to raise as well. So whether you're a supplier or a buyer, you will have information that's key to the declaration process. Typically, the supplier will know the goods, the description, the weights, the values, and the haulier will need that sort of information, not necessarily the values, but certainly the goods description and the weights. They might need consignment, commodity code details as well. So timely timely sharing of information is key, otherwise stuff will get held up going forward, whereas previously it wouldn't have needed that information. And on the next slide, we have a wonderful flow diagram, and I'll explain this one as a high-level overview of how goods are moving a standard way from GB to NI, and then we'll focus, I'll ask Shanker to talk about transit. So in a direct route, the Great Britain to Northern Ireland process from Liverpool to, say, Belfast port. On the bottom left-hand side there, you've got the supplier and buyer, and then above that, the haulier, TSS, HMRC, and ferry operator. And going across from left to right, we've got the flow of goods going from the supplier all the way to the buyer. and each organisation's function and action is in their particular row. So bottom left, somebody buys some things from you, somebody in Northern Ireland, you agree the sale details and you agree the Incoterms, and you supply the information to the haulier. Here are the goods that are going to this address. These are the goods descriptions, the weights, EORI numbers, new terminology that are required, and the haulier will use that information to create their manifest. They'll determine what goes on that particular vehicle for that day, or the day ahead, or whatever day that vehicle is leaving. And they'll either have one big consignment for a major organisation, or they'll have lots of consignments on that truck. They give that information to the TSS, and we raise the ENS, which you may remember is the entry summary declaration that the haulier must raise. And we also raise the simplified frontier declaration. So our bit there is free of charge. As long as we get that information, we submit that information to HMRC and send back the consignment detail, or MRN, movement reference number, for the haulier. And as I mentioned, it could be one declaration for that truck. It could be tens of declarations for that truck and for its particular movements. The haulier then has to complete, so we're on the pink box in the lower pink box in the middle, complete the GVMS entry. And again, it's purely the haulier has to do, so don't worry if you're a trader. And essentially what they're telling GVMS, a new government system, is I've got 10 declarations, for example, and here are the numbers, and I'm going to Liverpool at this time, and I'm going to enter Belfast at that particular time. That provides one reference number for all of those, so it bundles everything together into one reference number. And it's that they go to the ferry at the top of the slide there, hand in the GMR to Sten and Line, who check that against the government systems, and if all is okay, the vehicle gets on the ferry. If they don't have a GMR, or if a GMR is not recognised, they shouldn't be allowed into the port. HMRC use that information to do an assessment whilst the vehicle's crossing the sea, and then if those goods are standard goods and typical consignments, those goods will be pre-cleared so that the driver is then informed. You can on arrival at Belfast port, in this case, you can drive straight through. Sometimes goods are checked, in particular more so for the animal and plant products, and they'll go to an inspection point in the port to be checked. But once those checks are done, or if they've been cleared straight through, they can deliver the goods at the bottom pink block there to the buyer. There's a little bit of a break then, but we've got an arrow back up to the TSS which says we will now send the consignee, well, it's actually the declarant, excuse me, a request for more information. Depending on the Incoterms, we will send, so if it's X works, it's going to go to the buyer. If it's delivered duty paid, it will go to the supplier, and we'll say, these declarations were sent through on this date. Can you please give us the following information? It's typically commodity codes and values, and we provide that to HMRC. So by the 4th working day of the next month, we need that information, and then we'll respond back to you if there are any duties payable or that the declaration is closed out. And if they are payable, then they'll be by the 15th of the month. So that's a very quick canter from left to right and a bit of a complex flow. And then if we go to good old, yes, next one, please. Transit. I think for the benefit of the audience, transit is probably more important. So transit being from Holyhead to Dublin, which is what most of you said you would use as a route, and the same Fishguard to Rosslare would be the same. Shanker, do you want to take us through the variations on this? There's a couple of variations.
We've thanks, Frank, and we've gone over we haven't covered the SPS and the control goods slide. That's largely because there weren't so many traders in those areas on the call, but we will make these slides available to you, and if you are in that area, or if people are looking at this who weren't able to make the webinar itself, that explains the additional steps that are needed for those particular products. What I'll say about transit is, as I said at the beginning, this is really a process between the haulier TSS and the various government systems, HMRC and what's called NCTS, which is the new, not so new anymore, the transit system, which is a European system. So from a supplier standpoint, if you look at the supplier buyer, the trader row there, it doesn't look very different from what you are used to, what you'd be used to in a normal journey. But we are going to tell you how the transit process works. We're going to tell you that so that you understand that it is different from the current situation, where obviously you're going Holyhead, Dublin into Northern Ireland, and it isn't a major issue for you. There isn't any particular difference. Here there will be. So the haulier can use the transit process if they have a transit guarantee and if they have the appropriate authorized consignor and authorized consignee locations. There may be hauliers that you're dealing with who don't have those transit guarantees. It's generally the largest hauliers that will have those transit guarantees, and they'll just say to you, yes, we have the transit guarantees, we'll continue to use that route. This is particularly important for people who must use the Holyhead Dublin route, who don't have any logistical alternative. If you're working with a haulier company that doesn't have a transit guarantee, and some of the smaller hauliers might very well be in this category, fortunately, the TSS does have relevant transit guarantees, and the TSS also has authorized consignor locations which it can use. And so your haulier can use the TSS's guarantees to ensure that they can do this transit journey. So essentially what you will do as a supplier buyer, as a trader, is provide the goods to the haulier. You'll let them know where they're to be picked up and where they're to be delivered. The haulier will then consolidate all of that with the manifest data, and they will submit that to TSS. What TSS will then do is submit, if it's necessary, an export summary declaration. The reason why it might be necessary is because these goods are going through Ireland. They're going through a European member state, and therefore it might be necessary to do this, and that will be submitted into the ICS system, technically the Irish ICS system. We would raise transit movement on the NCTS system, which is the transit convention system, and that process would generate the relevant MRNs for each of the consignments on that truck load. And critically, the transit accompanying document, which is the thing that's printed out at the authorized consignor location, given to the driver, and the driver essentially has that with him. It is checked it is checked at the point at which the goods move from Holyhead to Dublin. The barcode is read. And the driver can move through on his transit journey, and the goods continue in customs control. The haulier will receive the appropriate MRNs and the transit accompanying document, and they will then be able to drive through. There will be a need for an entry summary declaration that will have to be done on the Irish ICS system. So just to clarify, if there is a need for an exit summary declaration, which technically applies to an export, that would be raised on the UK's ICS system. If there is there will be an ENS requirement, and that's raised on the Irish ICS system because you're transiting through Ireland, and that is done. At this point in the journey, and then the goods, the ferry operator then can process them. So assuming that at this point the relevant MRNs are in place, the transit authorization, the transit accompanying document is in place, the goods may be entered into the ferry terminal, and they may cross over into Ireland. They would then have to complete the relevant Office of Transit process on entry into Ireland, and the Irish equivalent of the GVMS system is effectively the Office of Transit. So there would be a message that the TSS would be raising there. Again, this is nothing a trader would see, but we are explaining this so you understand what your haulier is going to have to deal with. I would repeat that the TSS has a series of authorized consign all locations, so you don't have to take the haulier doesn't have to take the goods to an office of departure in the UK. They can use those authorized consign all locations as the starting point, so it can be done at the point of loading, where the goods are loaded onto the truck. The goods will then arrive at the authorized consignee location, and again, TSS has a series of authorized consignee locations, so you don't again have to drive the truck to the office of destination, which is the customs office in Belfast. You can go straight to the authorized consignee location, and you can unload the goods. If you don't have an authorized consignee location, or if you're going to a place that isn't one of the TSS's authorized consignee locations, that doesn't matter. The transit can still be closed off virtually at that place, and a message will be sent to Border Force. Border Force will be told the goods have arrived effectively, and there'll be a 10-minute or a 10 to 30-minute period when they may ask to see those goods. In other words, they may ask to make an intervention and a check. Generally with transit, this is very, very unlikely. It's a very, very small percentage, typically 1% or less, where that would occur. And most of the time, the driver will simply wait until the authorization process is concluded. Again, this is a matter of minutes rather than hours. It's 10 to 30 minutes, and then he can unload the goods. At this point, there is the raising of the simplified frontier declaration into the CDS system. The combination of the completion of the movement and the new customs process closes that transit movement. This then generates the all the required information so that the simplified frontier declaration can go through. We will, in TSS, in the same way that we do in a normal journey, go to the consignee and ask for extra information in the case of not controlled goods, which will be import commodity codes and that type of thing for the supplementary declaration, and then that has to be done by the 4th working day of the month following the movement itself. And then if the goods are at risk, duties will have to be paid. If they're not at risk, no duty has to be paid. And just to be clear, the command paper is very clear about this, and the draft decision is very clear about this, that you can use this route even if you are a not at risk trader. So if you made your application, as I mentioned earlier on, you can still use this route. This route does not require you to be the goods to be at risk, and that's essentially the transit process. So if we go to the next slide, and I'm going to ask Frank to come back in and talk about the onboarding checklist, which again, this is the third part of the thing, the three things you need to understand. One is, what are the new processes? How do they all work? What's your role in the whole flow, which we've just gone over? And the third bit is, what do I absolutely need as a trader to put together so that the TSS can have the information it needs in order to do the relevant declarations?
Thanks, Shankar. And as we mentioned earlier, depending on your role, you'll have one or another function within the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So we've listed out here traders, carriers and hauliers, or freight forwarders. And on the next page, we've got a more comprehensive list. So you can look at our NICTA website, Northern Ireland Customs Training Academy, for more detail on this checklist. So we've gone back again. Can you move forward? Thank you, Kevin. So we've got registration. These categories just highlighting in terms of checklists, making sure you've registered with a TSS and also the organisations within your supply chain if you're going to use a TSS. In the next category down is Incoterms. So ensure that you understand the Incoterms that we mentioned. And below that, product. So as well as product descriptions, you'll need things like commodity codes now to ensure that we can tell customs what the commodities are that you're moving. So commodity codes, and there may be subcodes within that depending on the type of goods you've got. So we mentioned P&R and Mersing codes there. And also it's important to find out from a category perspective if your goods fall into more controlled or more specialized categories, that they need licenses or additional customs entries. And if we go to the next slide, and one again, I won't cover NI to GB because we've already covered these slides and next two. And then I think we're on to Kevin on the next update.
Thank you very much, Shanker and Frank. That's really, really helpful. So what we're going to do is just summarise now. We will go on, if it's okay, slightly after 12 p.m. because we started a few minutes after 11. I guess we'll start to go through the questions, and I noticed looking at some of the questions, there's talk, I guess, around processes, and the message we clearly want to get to traders today is you must communicate with your hauliers who, as we've indicated, are key to this process. So by all means, when we circulate these slides and make them available, share them with your hauliers. We have engaged heavily with the haulage community, so hopefully the hauliers have this information already, but you need to engage with them. Equally, as has been indicated, you need to liaise with your Northern Ireland buyer to agree the Incoterms. So it becomes absolutely essential. And if anyone is not sure around Incoterms, there are guides, as we can see on the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, around how Incoterms operate. So you can see on the slide here how to use Incoterms. There is also guides around commodity codes if you're not sure what your commodity code to use is. And there is also guides here around the requirement for XI EORI numbers. So we had a question around, do I quote my XI EORI number and UK EORI number? So that would be your GB EORI number and your XI EORI number on the commercial invoice. The answer to that is yes. You most certainly need the XI EORI number on the commercial invoice. So on the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, we can see what's already available and what's coming in that regard. And there will also be further details on the UK Trusted Trader Scheme around the at-risk process. And there was a question, I think, around the at-risk is who applies for UK Trusted Trader? Is it the seller or buyer? Well, whilst in theory that could depend on the Incoterms that are used, it's probably wise that both seller and buyer sign up to the UK Trusted Trader, because there could be different Incoterms moved for different trade transactions between GB suppliers and Northern Ireland buyers, and also Incoterms can change. So it's very vital that just with the Trader Support Service, that all businesses sign up for both the Trader Support Service and the UK Trusted Trader Scheme as well. So I'm not going to refer to bulk upload because that's something that's very haulier specific, but again, or large trader specific. So I'll move on from that, but there are guides on that. But one of the key messages today, if you haven't done so already, but over 19,000 businesses, organisations have, is to sign up to the Trader Support Service. Absolutely vital, because we need your information, or we need you registered to actually see that there will be goods movements from Wales to Northern Ireland. And please obviously encourage your haulier to sign up if they haven't done so, but also your Northern Ireland buyer. So that becomes absolutely key. I would also sort of add, and I'm very happy to check whether we've covered all the questions. I've got some written out here. If you sign up today, there's an auto allocation of the XI. So if you haven't done so, please sign up today to the Trader Support Service. I also want to mention with regard to Incoterms, we've focused on DDP and Ex Works. If you are the DDP, delivered duty paid, is the only circumstance in which the Welsh supplier is responsible for the declaration. If it's DAP, delivered at place, then it's the Northern Ireland. If it buyer, if it's FCA free carrier, it's also the Northern Ireland buyer as well. But we encourage suppliers and buyers to be very, very clear on the Incoterms. So even if clearly there are elements here in terms of haulier transaction, how the operating model is going to work, it's fundamental that you agree those Incoterms and you sign up to the Trader Support Service. Because what we're introducing here is concepts around Incoterms, around commodity codes, which again, going back to the previous slide on the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy, there are guides available to you. Now, in terms of questions, I've got a few noted on the question. I'm just going to ask Shanker a question, if that's okay. So there was a question around in moving goods under transit. So Holyhead to Dublin, for example, where do SPS checks occur? So if I could ask Shanker that, please. Thank you.
That's a good question. So first of all, even if you're moving goods in transit through Ireland, that does not prevent the need for SPS. It does not mean you don't have to engage with the SPS processes. So you will need to raise the export health certificates and all the other issues that are relevant to your SPS movements. And it is possible that there would be an SPS check at the border control post in Dublin. So what would happen is the truck would appear in Dublin. If it's carrying SPS goods, it might be opened up and that might be checked. So there might be some delays. Now, the only thing I would say is that this is also tied to the grace period that has been agreed in the Joint Committee for export health certificates and for some of the SPS documentation, where there's a 3-month grace period. However, that's obviously only 3 months, and that will come to an end, and you will need to have your processes in place, well before the end of that grace period. You don't want to be in a situation where it's days to go before the end of the grace period, and you're not ready to do these things. And as I pointed out earlier on, the government has a movement advisory scheme that DEDFWRA has put together specifically to help traders with this. So you need to contact the movement advisory scheme now and figure out what it is that you're going to need. But there will be the potential for an SPS check at the border control post in Dublin, and then it'll happen if it's required. The truck will then be resealed if there was a seal on it to start with, and it will be sent on its way.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Shanker. So I hope that's covered most of the questions. Now, if you have any questions you want to answer subsequent, or I missed any of the questions raised in the panel, please either when you sign up for the Trader Support Service, and I'm sure many of you have already, then please feel free to raise that question to the Trader Support Service. Also, by all means, you can raise further questions on the chat facility in the next couple of minutes, or you can raise through the colleagues at the Welsh Government, who will forward on to ourselves. I hope it's been very helpful today. Can I thank everyone for joining? There are obviously some very key messages here today. In terms of how you trade going forward. So that's to obviously speak to your buyers in Northern Ireland and liaise with your hauliers as well on the process, and make sure that they're very clear on the process as well. So thank you very much, and as I say, please feel free to raise questions, and my thanks to Frank and Shanker as well. Thank you.